is perhaps one of the more vital of our publications. I've selected that for the present series. For historical orientation, the material was first distributed in the form of letters and lessons to students about 1940. It first appeared in print in book form in 1942, therefore approximately 18 years ago. In the interval since the writing of the book, there have been many and marked changes in our way of life. And looking back over the years and trying to estimate the changes, it still seems to me that the essential principles as set forth have not been changed or greatly modified by any of the so-called discoveries of science or by the elements of modern progress. We say this with full appreciation of the fact that any work done by a human being must be dated. No individual can possibly penetrate beyond the sphere of experience. Therefore, it is a mistake to assume that any writing is infallible. It relates to its own times and to the conditions that exist in those times. And its lingering validity depends upon the degree of a basic truth which is contained in the principal premises and objectives of a given work. I feel in this case that the book has a certain strength, having been derived from those sources of knowledge which have had undiminished authority for more than 2,500 years. We may outgrow many things, but we have not yet and will not outgrow the need for virtue, the need to develop integrities, or the pressing requirement for individual security in troubled times. These elements remain, and while they remain, philosophy and comparative religion maintain the validity of their essential points of view. The purpose of the book, very largely, was to meet what I believed at that time to be a basic need. There has always been, in the West, a group of persons seriously desiring to advance consciousness through some form of organized program of study and discipline. And in this book we present what I feel to be a comparatively safe interpretation of certain established disciplines practiced among both Eastern and Western nations, but in their complete and original forms, not entirely practical to Western man. The human being must work against the reference frame of the conditions in which he finds himself. It is not reasonable or proper to demand that any person place himself in a situation in which he is at great personal disadvantage, or to attempt procedures which are not likely to succeed in the way of life with which he is most familiar. Our text, therefore, is concerned with a kind of yoga, a modification of East Indian philosophy, strengthened and directed through the contributions of other Eastern schools and brought into Western focus by means of Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism. Thus we feel that we have bridged the primary interval of learning, the interval which divides naturally Eastern and Western cultures. Eastern culture is essentially subjective. Western culture essentially objective. This may not always remain the truth. There is a continual process in nature which tends to lead to an alternation of polarities among living things. It is therefore quite conceivable that in the course of time Eastern civilization will become highly objective, and that Western culture may in turn become more distinctly subjective. But modern man, living in our present century and under the pressure of contemporary problems, still remains in the West essentially objective. When in doubt, he takes a rather aggressive point of view. He may very likely strike out against circumstances with all the vitality and libido at his command. He is going to fight his way, work his way, struggle his way, or even talk his way through the various problems that arise. He therefore uses a tremendous amount of objective energy and has come to conclude that expenditure of energy is the essential ingredient in progress. There may be some doubt as to this. Certainly there is some grave question as to whether the individual can fight his way from ignorance to wisdom. This point of view, then, leads us to the need for Eastern subjective balance of thinking. The individual must be taught that the search for truth is not a competitive quest for success as we know such a questing in Western life. The search for improvement is a very much more subjective thing, and in order to succeed at all, it must be undertaken with a right kind of attitude. It must be approached not offensively or even defensively. It must be approached with a simple directness of action, which again seems strange to us. Western civilization has gradually deprived man of direct action. He may deny this, but actually he is continually conditioned, and whenever he feels the impulse to act in a direct manner, he begins also to sense reactionary cautions arising in his own temperament, warnings that direct action may lead to loss of social adjustment. In this book, therefore, we have attempted certain basic principles of yoga, but we have tried to also defend the student against the dangers of yoga for Western man. We have tried to point out, for example, that the scientific aspect of self-development is not as yet suited to us. And since the preparation of this book, we've had very strong support for this particular point of view. Western man, having become aware of the powerful instruments of knowledge, has already gravely endangered his own survival by his belief that scientific processes are legitimate and may be used regardless of moral consequences. The same thing that could happen and did happen in society in releasing upon us the dangers of what we now call the atomic age is a good symbol of what might occur within us if we rely entirely upon a scientific approach to the attainment of self-mastery. Theoretically, the West would like to approach the problem of man with complete scientific thoroughness. Actually, however, science without certain value controls, without certain background of culture, can be, and usually is, extremely dangerous. In the East, where yoga or Zen or Taoism are prevalent beliefs, we have a culture that has been conditioned for ages, a long ways unfamiliar to us. In the first place, the great body of Eastern mankind has been unaware of what we term success and only slightly aware of what we call progress. Eastern man has not sought the expansion of a way of life as we have in the West. Also, from the earliest experience of Oriental history, Oriental culture,